is a helping profession that we employ values, skills, and theories of human behavior and social systems to resolve social problems affecting individuals, groups, and communities. So I want that recorded as a social worker. So we acknowledge that we have an aging population, that people are living longer, as Statin has indicated. WHO 2020 reflects that the life expectancy of people are 76 years, with men living to 74.4 years on average, and women 77.7 years. 13.9% of our 2.9 million residents in Jamaica are 60 and older. According to the latest population census, 2011, which is very dated, the population aged 60 and older was recorded at 306,401 individuals. And I'm just laying the framework for my recommendations. So we want to understand aging. Aging can be classified in a number of ways. Normally, people think in terms of chronological aging. We have biological, we have physiological, and we have social. And we need to understand that in the context of the social implications that come along with that. So for many people, once you reach a certain age, which is a chronological way of classifying aging, once you reach a particular age, we almost put you out to past that. Age 65, you retire, so you're no longer of any worth. It doesn't take into account the fact that person's actual health and capability. So we look at age, 65, you retire, you get some benefits and you get some and some services, but we don't look in terms of your actual health and capabilities. Then biological aging, which all of us go through, the hair start turning a little white, our body start changing a little bit, we're moving a little slower. And that has to do sometimes with how fast you age has to do with genetics sometimes, your environment and your lifestyle. The psychological piece is a piece that I'm very much involved in, which is, some persons will have changes in their cognitive abilities. It affects their emotional, how they regulate their emotions. It will affect their memory, and by virtue of that, their personality. So, I will pause here to talk a little bit about dementia. So dementia is a disease of the brain. So it's going to affect your mood, your ability to perform certain activities of daily living, but it's also going to affect your personality. The Alzheimer's Disease International reports that every 3 seconds somebody is diagnosed with the disease. And a study done by Eldemire Shearer in Jamaica said that there's a 6% prevalence of dementia among people over 65 years. So it's 1 in 16 people. So it will affect persons' ability to adapt and to perform certain functions that they need to do for themselves. And then we have the big piece, the social aging piece, which many people don't want to talk about, because in that we have ageist beliefs about older adults, that they are unable to do certain things, and sometimes this is where our laws are made. So we don't take into account other things. We take into account the fact that people no longer can do certain things, and so their roles in the family and their roles in society is diminished. So most of the times our laws are based on the social ageism. So let me just, quick definition, WHO defines ageism as stereotypes, how we think about older people, prejudice, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act about certain people. I also want to make the point within the context of our submission to talk about the fact that older adults are not a heterogeneous group, and I'm glad that your chair talked about inviting older adults to be a part of the discussion, because it really does affect them. And then we also want to talk about within the context of age. So we have different stages of age. We have old age, we have the oldest old, we have young old, we have centenarians, and they also come with different factors, and they have different needs, so we need to make sure that we recognize that as well. And then we have gender as a big piece of in that dynamics as well. Men and women experience aging differently, and I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of our recommendation for the law. Socioeconomic class, people who have and people who don't have, aging also affects them differently because of their, their financial background, their education, and so on. Rural, urban, and ability. So we need to think about those things as part of our discussions when we're talking about setting up laws. So the purpose of this submission covered 3 broad areas. The proposed inclusion in the legislative framework regarding older adults in keeping with international charters, The second one, entitlements under the Charter of Rights for older adults. And the third one, the role of care professionals for older adults. And that piece, because of social work, I could not talk about that. So the legislative framework that we're putting forward, the overall goal of this legislative framework that we're putting forward, seek to guarantee the rights, dignity, and these are not measurable, so we have to talk about specifically what that looks like. The rights, dignity, and well-being of older adults, ensuring their active participation in decision-making that in matters that affect them, once they're capable of doing that. We also want to acknowledge that older adults are not simply recipients of care, but are integral participants at the individual, community, and societal levels. So we don't want to ignore that they have certain things that they are still able to perform. So that is the overarching. So what are the specific things that we want the legislation to look at? We want an agreed age definition of older adults. Some people say 65, some say 60. The National Policy of Senior Citizens 2021 defines an older adult as somebody who is 60 years and over. So we need to have a clear definition about who is an older adult. We want to talk the legislation to look at safety and protection of older adults. So the Act needs to address violence against older people, stipulating the offenses against older adults and the penalties for such offenses, just like in the Child Care and Protection Act. It should address mandatory requirements for healthcare professionals and social workers to report the matter to the police and to the National Council for Senior Citizens. So we want the Act to talk about that. The offenses addressed in the Act should include neglect, abuse, physical and emotional and financial. And I want to raise an issue about the financial. I went to a seminar recently, and there was an increase in Canada and the UK, I think. They talked about predatory marriages. So the Act, when the persons were experiencing it with their own family members, there was no piece of legislation to help them to deal with it. So I want to point that out, and the legal minds in there can help us to think through what would that look like and how could we address that.
Ms. Latibaudiere, say a little bit more about what predatory marriages really are.
So predatory marriages is where sometimes an older adult will marry somebody, sometimes with diminished capacity. In the case that the lady presented, it was her mother, and her mother had dementia. And so what the gentleman did, same age, not necessarily a younger person, but somebody her own age, older, but he had his capacity. He told the judge and the person who was preparing them for marriage, the counselor, he declared she has dementia, but he didn't go in details. So she may not talk a lot, so he declared that up front, but not saying that she had diminished capacity, that she could not make that decision on her own. And so, so it wasn't a young person. So we see it clear when it's a younger person, but this person was an older person. And so when he married her, he got all her possession. The family could not access her, couldn't even go to the funeral when she died, took all of her assets and so on. And then he moved on to the next victim. So when the families got wind of it, they tried to get the police and the law and try to explore what kind of laws could protect them, and there was nothing in law that could protect them, because as lawyers, which I'm not, when you get married, marriage don't require that much level of intention, and I think it's at the lower level. And so if you agree, then that's fine. But with other contracts, for you to engage in other kind of contractual matters, it's more detail that you have to get into, but not necessarily for marriage. Yes, I agree to marry you, and that's it. And so there was nothing that they could use to protect the family. Yes.
So, in your definition of predatory marriage, it doesn't have to be between, for example, a person who is quote-unquote in total have their faculties together in a relationship with someone who is suffering from dementia, for example. It can be two persons who have their faculties intact. You might have a younger person end up marrying to an older person, and the younger person also exploiting the older person. Isn't that the situation?
That is correct.
Okay.
But in this situation, how it came about was really somebody with declining cognitive impairment. Because we have a lot of that going on with younger persons undermining other people. But in this case, because we're looking at the vulnerability, we want to put it on record, because we have persons with diminished capacity who really cannot. And so they can't get out of it. A younger person, even under duress, can see that it is wrong and probably can find a way to get out of it. When you have an older person there and you're in total control, that person does not have the capacity to reason that this is not a safe space. Because they don't know, they can't recognize that it is not a safe space.
Yes. Madam Chair, since you're the legal luminary here, what does the Rights of Spouses Act say about the time frame that you, in a marriage, you know, if there is separation or death, that you can benefit from the property? What?
You mean how long it takes for it to be deemed a marriage? Not sure.
The benefits. So, for example, I am aware that if you are married and you divorce, there's a time frame in which you have to be in that marital relationship, you know, for benefits to flow from the...
I'm not aware, Senator Morris, that there's a time frame.
I think it's immediate.
The application has to be made within a year, but I don't know that we have a time frame for the duration of the marriage. Once you are married, your rights vest then, but there's of course a presumption, so that if there's a presumption in terms of a 50-50 entitlement, but it can be rebutted if you haven't really contributed to it, to the marital asset. The other party can establish that.
So if, for example, in this case, you have an older person who is married to another person, and the older person should die within a year of the marriage, am I to understand that when the older person dies, or the partner dies that owns the property goes to the other person?
Well, remember now, that is a matter of death. That's not a matter of divorce, which is different. I would think the person would have some entitlement there, unless that property is willed, or the ownership structure of that property includes other owners, whether as joint tenants or tenants in common. It's not a simple math. But the bottom line, and I think that's where you're heading, Senator Morris, there is a risk. There is a risk of loss to the family, particularly if the property was a property that was intended to be passed down to the generations. There is a risk. It's not absolute, though.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I just ask Senator Fraser-Binns, who, Senator Longmore, do you have your mic out? Okay. Can you turn off Senator Morris's mic for me?
And before you turn off my mic, let me just welcome my colleague, Sandra, who is on sabbatical. I haven't seen her in a while. So she's completing her PhD, one of the stars of the Faculty of Social Sciences.
I thank you for that.
So what she says here is authority. All right?
Yes, and it's a lot of meat, so I don't want us to be too delayed. But Senator Longmore, let me ask you to just go ahead, and then Senator Fraser-Binns. Oh, Senator Fraser-Binns, Senator Longmore has yielded for you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I don't really have much to add because you have answered correctly. But I want to just add that if it is that a family member is of the view that an elderly person lacks capacity and then enters into marriage, then that is a medical legal matter. So once there is this concern, then the legal procedure would have to be ensued. You'd have to go to the doctor and get medical certification, and then we can proceed that way. But outside of that, Senator Morris, once the marriage is deemed legal, in other words, there is no claim of lacking in mental capacity, then once the marriage is completed, then both spouses share everything. And even if there's a will, then, as you know, the marriage revokes the will, so a new will would then have to be entered into by the parties.
The bottom line, though, and I think Senator Fraser-Binns would agree with me, none of these processes are quick or easy to engage.
Absolutely.
They're quite difficult processes to access. Senator Longmore.
Because even to show, Milady Chairman,
Go ahead.
Even to show lack of mental capacity, there's a whole process that one has to go through to establish that before the courts.
Yes, Senator Longmore and I have had conversations about how difficult that is too. Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Latibudur, for being here. Really appreciate your work, especially the social work beginnings. Thank you. I appreciate this very significant point that you're bringing. And just to be clear, and it is a matter around elderly entering into contractual arrangements. Because if we reflect on, let's say, a banking institution, once a person is of a certain age, there is a reluctance for a financial institution to issue a loan. Because they recognize the limitations in continuity of payment, et cetera, et cetera. And I really just want to reflect as we consider the legislative approach that it is not just about the predatory marriages, but predatory financial arrangements that sometimes our elderly are predisposed to, and how we may avert and protect for such. And just to underscore again, it goes back to, I think, what the council had presented in terms of a routine screening process and recording process. And it is really for us to educate the public about what needs to be done to protect our elderly population. So thank you so much for bringing that.
Agreed. I agree wholeheartedly. And your colleague is right. It's a medical legal issue. So you're in fact correct. So we want to talk about, abuse, physical, emotional, financial, violence by caregivers, because we have quite a number of caregivers who are in fact hurting or their charge, the care recipient. So we want to talk about violence by caregivers, institutions, and family members. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go further. Then I want to talk about the legally defined capacity of older adults. I think that's where you're going, and the council, and the provision for such things as living wills and advanced age directives. So I want to talk about that legally defined capacity. A lot of the persons who I work with, the families who I work with, they have a hard time, forgive me, for the doctors to give them the go-ahead for them to apply for guardianship. A lot of them having issues, the doctors will not sign off. So even though they have diagnosed them, and it's just now that you're seeing a diagnosis of dementia on people's records. Before it was cognitive impairment, or if they died from something else. Yet, globally, people are dying from dementia. It's the 7th leading disease that kills people. 7th. But many countries don't record it as a person dying from dementia. They'll put it to other things. So the tracking of that also is problematic. So we want to talk about legally defined capacity of older adults and the provision for such things as living wills and advanced age directives. So that persons, if we're talking about quality and dignity of the older adults, we need to do what their instructions are. And when they lack capacity, we want to make sure that we still recognize and respect their rights. Another point that we wanted for us to consider, the role of monitoring of the care of older adults by government agencies. And the chair talked about the National Council for Senior Citizens and their role. I guess here I'm saying, can we expand that role where they have responsibility to do more than just implement, but to also be provide a rigorous support for older adults. And of course, the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Those two agencies. I'm sure there are more, but there's a role of monitoring of the care for older adults by government agencies. Another context that we wanted to raise was aging in place, that is home-based care, and the gender component attached to that. So many of our older adults want to live in their own home. Some of them are not able to do so, but the surrounding people with dementia, even though they may not remember, when you change their routine, they get very anxious and they can get very agitated. And people see it as them being disruptive. People see it as them being oppositional. People see it as being defiant. But really and truly, because the language skill is no longer there, and they can't tell you what they want to tell you, it manifests itself in agitated behaviors. And so persons, caregivers who are not trained, will see this as them being oppositional, and we want to abuse them and hurt them in the process. So we want to look at aging in place. The study that I'm doing, a lot of church members, even though sometimes the care recipient, which is an older adult, does not attend that church, you have older persons in the churches who take the time to look after the older adult. They don't know them. That is what I've been finding in my study. I don't want to say too much because I don't defend it yet. But I want to plug it there, that we do still have this communal thing, outreach, this communal thing that we as Afro-Americans, Afro-Caribbean people still maintain. So I want to talk about aging in place. The gender piece, we want to say that aging affects men and women differently. Older women live 4 to 5 years longer than men. That is the National Institute on Aging reports that, and are more likely to live at home with family. So the women are more likely to live at home with families, and the men are normally relegated to residential care. So we have the stats on that many times the older women will live in the homes with their children, and the men will need residential care facilities to look after them. So again, when we're talking about legislation, we have to look at the agenda as well. Yeah, the children, and also we want to talk about that women face financial difficulties later in life. They live longer, but because they are doing a lot of the care, their ability to earn is also affected. So sometimes they have to come out of the formal working environment to provide this care. And again, the studies, and in conclusion with my studies, we have found that between 70 to 80% of care is provided by family members. So we have informal care, 70 to 80% of caregiving provided to older adults are by family members. And half the time, these family members don't have the resources to look after both of them. And when that person dies, that caregiver family member has no insurance, they have no recourse, they have no savings, and sometimes the children who come back, they will put them out of the house, and I can say that definitively. And so they become homeless and financially insecure. So the act should address aging in place by highlighting the role of social workers, and again, I said the National Council for Senior Citizens and the community health aides in the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I realize that a lot of the outside of Kingston, you have a lot more nursing aides, and they do actual home visits. So in the rural communities, you have a lot more persons from the Ministry of Health and Wellness doing home visits. That's what I found when I went to the Western region doing my study.
Ms. Latibaudiere, can I just ask you, what are the numbers of social workers that exist? Do you have any idea?
I asked Jaswa, we're still trying to get that figure, but I know for the university, over the past couple of years, we have graduated in the undergrad at least 50 students each year.
Each year?
Yeah.
And is there a role for social workers outside of academia and outside of the public sector system? How are they utilized in the private? In
private sectors, well, for the most part, our social workers are usually when organizations have like foundations and they're doing outreach, because a part of our skill set is actually to get people to work together. So we do community social work where we engage communities to build their resilience, to build their capacity for them to do things on their own. And so we do that through some of the non-government organizations. And that is how we utilize. So our skills are transferable in every sector. So we have social workers at the, once you're involved with people, so like JPS, organizations that you would never think of, but once you're working with people, you need social workers. Once you're going to work with people who, even with retirement planning, you need social workers because we understand we take into account people's emotions. So we do community organizing, we do clinical. Many people think that social workers are only clinicians, but we actually do administration and we actually do community organizing. And we work in communities to help them to build their capacity for them to lead their own community. So we are facilitators. So we are across the board. Any organization you can think of has at least one social worker. But unfortunately, we're not called social workers. We're assigned the role or the designation of that organization. Like for our child care and protection, CPFSA, they are called, they're not called social workers. They're called children's officers or stuff like that. So you won't know that they're there. They work in HR as well, but you won't know them as social workers, just the background.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Sandra, you said that on average we graduate about 50 social workers at the university, at the West Indies. So I would take it that, you know, for the past 10 years, for example, we would have pushed, graduated about 500.
Yes.
And there are other tertiary institutions
That's correct.
that
That's
are
correct.
engaged in the training of social workers.
That's correct.
You have any idea as to the retention rate in Jamaica of these social workers? And with the expansion of the PATH program and the rapid aging of our population, it seems as if we will have to ramp up the training of social workers. You know, speaking from the Department of Social Work at Mona, are there plans to expand the number of graduates there?
Well, unfortunately, many families don't think that social work is a profession and that people don't need to be trained to become social workers. So we're fighting that cultural stigma as well, that people can do, you know, once you have a kind heart and you love people, then you're actually a social worker. But a social worker is actually a trained professional. It is because we use values, we use ethics. You know, some things that we do are not illegal, but it can be unethical. And so the training does, in fact, we train social workers to recognize their own ethical values, and when they interact with other people, what that could mean. So we're talking about suspension of sometimes your own personal values, and it's a training that requires rigor. And some persons have actually decided that they don't want to do social work anymore because it's too hard. And then we have other persons coming in. So yes, it is, you know, part of the problem is that many people don't know what we do, and so they don't want to come to university to study social work. So it's a part on us too that we need to raise the awareness that social work is a profession, and people need to be trained to be called social workers.
Yes, yes. And I was told that with the recent compensation review, that the salary packages are more attractive.
Unfortunately, in some institutions, social workers have to advocate for their own, on their own. I'm not going to go into that, but we have social workers in some organizations that when the compensation package is rolled out, they are not a part of that discussion, and they're not a part of that group.
Okay.
So I'll just leave that there.
All right. Okay.
All right. So basically what we're saying is that we want to expand the role of the National Council for Senior Citizens to engage in monitoring elder abuse and maintaining the registry of older adults in each parish to assess their needs, whether medical and non-medical, and the kinds of support they'll require to preserve their dignity.
Ms. Latibur, I ask you to just pause a moment. Senator Fraser-Binns, your hand is raised.
Yes, Chairman, thank you. And I want to go back to something that Ms. Latibur spoke about earlier, and it is the training of caregivers. Because one of the things is that you find, especially in families who are not exposed to or do not have or have not had incidents of persons with dementia, that there is a lack of understanding. And I like when you talk about the training of caregivers. The challenge I have though is families will have to be intentional about getting this training. So I wanted to find out from you whether in your knowledge, there are organizations that offer these services for training of persons who want to understand but don't want to be a social worker, but they want to understand because perhaps they have a family member who is suffering from dementia. The other thing as well is the cost implication, because for a lot of persons, they want to understand, but then they have to find the money to be able to go to these classes. Perhaps, and I want to get your view on it, whether it is something that as we contemplate this Elderly Care Act, it's one of the support services that the state can give to have classes, or even classes at community centers, whether online, where persons can learn how to deal with members who have dementia. Because as you said earlier, that increasingly we're finding more and more of our household being affected, but with persons with dementia. And I was very surprised when you mentioned that, I think you said 7% of
6%.
deaths are from persons with dementia.
Yeah.
You could correct me, but I was very
is the
intrigued
seventh leading disease that kills people. Seventh leading,
right?
Seventh.
And I was very surprised because I did not know that. And I think, Chairman, it is for this reason why we're having this kind of committee meeting, and it also underscores why we need this act. But the issue of public education, in my mind, is something that we have to focus on, and it has to be one where there is not necessarily a cost attached. So any family member that has an interest to say, okay, I noticed my mom or my grandma or my aunt is not functioning as they used to, could it be dementia? And they can have this information readily available with somebody who is trained to work with them so that they can better care for their family member. Because I don't believe, well, I want to believe that it's not that people want to be abusive or dismissive of the elders in their family, but sometimes they're just frustrated because, you know, when you have somebody who's 60-year-old and they're going back to when they were 10 and 12 and asking you about questions where they were 20 and 30, and you're like, and you say it over and over and they keep going at it, it really does become frustrated. And so what we have to do is to teach them how to deal with this new dispensation among the elderly. So I think the public education is going to be important, and I wanted to get your views, Ms. Latibadir, in terms of how the state can assist in making this accessible and affordable.
Okay. As it is now, Mona Aging and Wellness does a lot of those training once they have a cohort, and sometimes they'll get funding, and so the persons may not have to pay, but it's not consistent. So I'm glad you said in the public arena, if it could be standardized so that more people can have access. So whether it is through the Mona Aging and Wellness or other institutions, I know that the Nurses Association, they sometimes do some training, not necessarily specific to older adults, but you know, it's a discussion that we could have in your report to talk about how we could standardize. Because I know that Mona Aging and Wellness, they have a model, a template for doing that kind of training, and actually there's one running currently through the Mona Aging and Wellness.
Thank you.
Continue.
All right. So, and then we want to talk about older adults living in residential care facilities. The Act provides an opportunity to either broaden the scope of the Nursing Homes Registration Act, because as it does now, it just talks about registration, but it doesn't take into account quality of care and the qualifications of the persons who are running these institutions. So we can either expand the Nursing Home Registration Act, or we can establish a Nursing Home Care Standards Act, like what is in the United Kingdom, to work in tandem with the Nursing Homes Registration Act. So, yeah. And then we talked about mandatory training of caregivers. And I also want to raise a social insurance contribution for care work. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes the caregivers, they are left homeless and income insecure after the person who they care for has died. Because sometimes they don't get any pay. Sometimes whatever they earn, they actually have to use it to help the older adult that they're looking after. And so there's, you know, income insecurity for them at the end.
I had to ask how this works, especially in the informal sector. So these are whether the neighbor, the household, the person in the family. But how does it work? Because it's non-contributory. Where would they get that kind of social service support from?
Well, I know that there is something under the NIS where persons who are not in the formal sector, who are not contributing to something, there is, I think, it's a one-off.
One-off.
I think it's kind of payment. But you know, that could be looked at to expand. But I know that that's a recent development.
Right, because one of the challenges that for these persons who are caring for the elderly, oftentimes they have no monetary gains, nor do they have any financial support, and you are expected to make laws to protect them against who they are caring for. So that's something that we really have to look at. That's an important thing that we have to look at. And my presentation includes the definition of an informal carer as opposed to a formal caregiver who, you know, training has to be specific for the formal caregivers. They have to be trained. And public awareness and, you know, information sessions for family members who are, you know, their family members are going through that.
Can you assist Senator Morris with the mic?
No? Okay. Yes. Is the formal caregiver someone that has to be trained, or is it the formal caregiver someone who is in a full-time employment situation catering to the elderly person? Because from my understanding, the informal caregiver would be somebody, you know, a neighbor, a church sister, who is giving some form of support. So that doesn't necessarily involve training, but there is support.
Yeah.
But the caregiver now is someone who is there on a full-time basis.
That is correct. That is correct. So the formal caregiver is a paid person. And sometimes, unfortunately, and I think one of your colleagues raised it, that if the care recipient, the older adult, has cognitive impairment, you can't employ a household worker, a housekeeper. You can't employ, I know it's costly, but you can't employ somebody who does not have an idea about the disease, because it can lead to stress on both parties.
Yes.
So when we talk about a paid caregiver, we're talking somebody who you pay. But if you're going to do, you know, an older adult who has their own faculty, they can still perform activities of daily living. You may want a housekeeper just to do the household cleaning and so on, and engage a person. But if the person has a specified disease, like dementia, you can't employ a housekeeper, and you can't employ a housekeeper to look after the care recipient and look after the house and do everything else. Yeah. So even with the suggestion that we're making, that you talk about looking at a Nursing Home Care Standards Act. Some of our nursing homes, they do not provide the kind of stimulation for the older adults. When they come to the nursing homes, oftentimes they have no activities that they are engaged in. Even if the property that the nursing home is on has a lovely property and persons can go out and get some sun. We talk about, you know, just allow me, please. When we talk about older adults and sun and sea and sand, there's something called grounding that persons talk about that we take for granted. The fact that you are putting your foot on sand and getting the energies. The fact that you're outside in the sun, it does help. The fact that you're engaged in some activities, even if you are not remembering. The person with diminished capacity or with diagnosed dementia still can feel. They may not remember, but they remember how you made them feel. Feeling don't go away. And so you want to engage them in activities. You want to learn about them. You want to learn about them before the disease, because the disease is just that. It's a disease. But how they perform certain things will not change. And something like that. Yeah, so I know time. So we talk about income insecurity. And we talk about mandatory training for caregivers who are paid in paid capacity. And just two things. Entitlements of older adults. We talk about decent living, livable housing conditions. We talk about care older adults who want to live in their home. They want to remain in their home as long as they can. What we have found is that many of them live in dilapidated housing because they can't maintain it. How can we ensure that people live in their own homes as long as they can? Many countries have found ways, and just to give an example, one country, somebody is paid somebody can live in the home of the older adult, and but they have to pay something. It don't have to be the ideal rent, but that they contribute something. So there are many ways that we can talk about what that could look like, that people can live in their home as long as they can. And many older adults own their own homes. Many of our older adults are homeowners. And so if we could, pair them up with somebody else who can bring some skills so that they are providing shelter and they're still able to live in their own homes. So a lot of gymnastics that we can look about that. Non-care, we want to talk about independent living of older adults. Some countries have their own older adults communities, that older adults who can live on their own independently can. So we probably can start thinking about that because we have lots of spaces. We have lots of returning residents, and I tell you, St. Mary, we set up a memory club in St. Mary because we have a lot of returning residents who come back and they have the space. We just need to work with them to see how best we can. They come back and they have 5-6 bedrooms and it's one person or 2 people.
Yes.
How can we engage with them so that they don't feel so lonely? And many of them return to the UK because they feel lonely. The children not coming back. So how can we engage in that we don't lose that? Because that's an opportunity that we could utilize. One country, what they did, they had students who would live with the older adult during the semesters, and they would, spend time with them, talk to them, leave from there to go to school. There are so many ways, so many opportunities that we could use to engage our older adults, this intergenerational transfer of knowledge, of sharing of, so many things that we could do. And one more point, support for older adults with disability. And I've spoken extensively about dementia already. And then, of course, mandatory accessible healthcare, where you have a multidisciplinary team of people. I see where there's a debate on social cases, where persons are left in the hospital, people don't come back for them. We want to think about a multidisciplinary team where you have social workers, gerontologists, physiotherapists who are part of that, and people can get access to those services. And sorry, Pro.
I must indicate, Sandra, that on the latter point that you mentioned in terms of older persons with disabilities, that was one of the major driving factors that caused me to table the resolution that was debated in the Senate, based on the work that I've been doing in that area. So, the issue of elderly care and the persons with disabilities, because we know that as the aging process unfolds, you are likely to experience some disabling conditions. And I tell people that, if your sight start to fade, if you're not able to walk the stairs as you used to, you are developing some form of disabling condition, because we're talking about functionality here. Yes. But you said something before that, Sandra, that is so important in the whole provision of elderly care and support, and that is our returning residents who are senior citizens. They return and they build some huge houses, 5 bedrooms and so forth, right? But they also build in some very remote areas in the country where the next neighbor is probably half a mile or so down the road. And that is something we're gonna have to engage a discussion with our returning residents who are senior citizens, you know, because their natural tendency is to build where they have land.
Yeah.
You know, but it is not the best, it is not the ideal situation because you want them to be in spaces where there are individuals that they can relate to, you know, and so that is something that we're gonna have to embark on a discussion with those senior citizens.
That is correct, yeah.
You know, we were told that you had to be here.
Really?
And we could
And
say...
now we see why.
Now we see why, and we also see the pupil in the class who is very attendant. But I must say there's a particular position that you have advanced that resonates with me, and it's about this defining the older adults. Because what it does, it indicates how you can treat with, at a particular point in time, guaranteed benefits.
That is correct. That is
and also how our government can plan and forecast. And it brought me back a kind of memory where during one of my collective bargaining submissions, I indicated that when you reach age 60, if we could carve out the health insurance to be at a particular distinction, especially around the prescription and drugs, that is separate from the, because you reach that stage where you become more dependent.
Exactly.
The then employer, and the person has gone on in latter life, but it was rejected because they cited from that the insurance company would not have approved or agreed that distinction. But I think it's something that we need to treat with because you're still at work, you're still offering that service, but you're at a point in life where you require an extensive support in that type of provisional benefits. Yeah? So it is, I mean, if it's not into law, but certainly into policies and also policies of the workplace, where we can define, have this distinction for guaranteed service and support, that when people reach age 60, there's that level of support. So I'm glad you brought it here, and I hope it is shared by others.
and you know, COVID taught us something. When you had to work from home and you had to create your own workspace, it taught us that we had to look at ergonomically correct chairs, how to sit and whatever. The same thing that you're talking about in the workplace. When you reach 60, you really ought to see how the resources, the equipment that people use, how they use it. All the adults need to get that kind of attention. There's an organization that has written a policy on caregiving. I can't remember the name of the organization. I beg them to share the policy with me. I haven't gotten it. But it's to do with care work. So persons who are in formal employment who are also caregivers. So we have a lot of people, I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted, that have family members who may or may not have cognitive impairment. And when you go home, you're doing another job. So you work 9 to 5, but you go home and then there's a 5 to next day, and then you go back to work. You know, and sometimes when these people turn up for work, they're exhausted. So we're talking about how can we talk about job security, job protection. They're still functioning, they're still working, but their capacity is also being reduced because they're not getting enough sleep, and sleep can affect person's memory. I'm going to end it there.
Before you end it, can you speak a little bit about, in your presentation you say the Act should seek to establish a national dementia plan. Would you speak a little bit about what that means, what you're talking about there?
So because our study says that there is a 6% prevalence, and the ADI, Alzheimer's Disease International, says every 3 seconds somebody is diagnosed with the disease. We still have stigma. We still have persons being being diagnosed. So diagnosis is in the rural areas. People think that you have been opioid and so on. And so the care and support that you would need, you don't get it. Because for disease like Alzheimer's, which is a type of dementia, Alzheimer's is a progressive disease. And so over time, it gets worse. But in the first phase of it, the first stages of it, you can actually get medication to reduce, slowing it down, not to cure it, but to slow it down, and you can still perform certain things. So a dementia plan, which Alzheimer's Disease International has asked us to advocate for our own countries to look at doing one, we talk about diagnoses, what kind of medication is needed to be on the health insurance so that people can, in fact, buy, through supported prescription that they can get the prescription filled at a reduced price.
Is that a legislative fix, though, Ms. Latibaudiere, or is that more policy or administrative?
Policy, administrative, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I wanted, because I had the opportunity, I just put it in there because that's my pet peeve, and I wanted it recorded.
And you got what you wanted.
Thank you for raising it.
Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Chair. And I just made my little notations. You're now finished because I know that it's a very substantive presentation, and we connect on many points. Firstly, just on where you ended, just to say that there is what we call an anti-cholinesterase on the NHF now for Alzheimer's, and it is actually almost free of cost for persons. So yes, there is that provision. I wanted clarity on one or two things. You mentioned a definition, and you said older adult, and I'm wondering, is there a distinction for you between older adult and elderly? Is there like a 65 to 75 cutoff, and then a cutoff of the older adult?
Is language really? Elderly sound old like
no,
senility.
I understand, but I just for what we're contemplating, there in terms of and your dementia consideration, and let me just underscore, like I said, there are many things. A significant amount of dementia presentations, or what we see, is actually what we call pseudo-dementia, which is depression masked as you solve the depression, you see the improvement in cognitive function. So while we're contemplating about dementia, we have to remember about the generativity versus stagnation phase, and when persons are actually depressed because of their status and what they're reflecting on in life. So why I would love if there's a proposal for specific age gaps, overall, your presentation is tying in with the recognition of the need for our laws to catch up with our society. And as we age, we have to see these distinctions, because there is a capacity that can be had between 65 and 75, and then another below, after that, and provisions that might be needed to be geared towards those age groups. It's like you go back to the other end of the scale with children. You have a certain recognition between 0 and 5, between 5 and 12, between 12 and 15, and so forth. So we are now recognizing, I said it in the last meeting, once a man, twice a child. We almost have to be seeking to provide, and one of the things that I'm hearing, you mentioned the National Dementia Plan, but perhaps an overall commission that looks at the care for the elderly. So just that clarification. Also, just to say, the significant role of social workers. Wherever I have a little soapbox to go on, I'm talking about community mental health teams. My colleague is here. One of the reasons we are pushing for the enhancement of community mental health teams is because those teams are the mental health professionals with psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric aides, social workers that go out into the community to provide a lot of what you speak of. So if we were to seek to enhance those resources, we'll be tapping into a lot of what is needed here. And lastly, I appreciate grounding. I advocate for it. I appreciate the sunshine. I advocate for it. So I appreciate that input from you. Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Dr. Longmore, can you just, the community mental health teams are currently in the structure of the community health programs?
Community mental health teams are a part or how the mental health services are dispensed into our communities. And those mental health services encompass all age groups. So from child issues all the way to elderly issues and of course the adult population. But what we are hearing and what would be great and efficient is to equip those teams with specialists. Specialist focused areas within those teams who are then able to dispense to the specific population. So it's not a matter of reinventing the wheel, but is enhancing what exists already.
Thank you so much. Ms. Latibadere, that's that's the end of your presentation.
That's the end of my presentation.
I think it might be the shortest in the number of pages, but it is indeed the most meaty presentation I think we have had so far.
Exactly.
And there was still more that wasn't on the paper that you spoke of. So we are deeply appreciative. I think I can speak for my colleagues when I say we're deeply appreciative for your intervention today. And you really have targeted the areas in terms of the legislative focus of what we are proposing. Senator Morris, before I wrap up with Ms. Latibadere.
Yes, you know, I have to say this, Madam Chair, because she is my colleague in whom we are all well pleased in the faculty, you know, and I have often whispered in meetings that, boy, you know, Sandra is just completing her PhD, but she is at the professorial level. You know, she's just top class.
Yes.
I wish you all the best, Sandra.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we've certainly experienced that today. Thank you so much for coming. I would ask if we can put you on notice that we may very well have to come back to ask you some questions as we learn more and deliberate in the final days on the matters that we have to consider. Thank you so very much. On our agenda, colleagues, so I want to ask the Caribbean community of retired persons who I believe are present to let us hear their presentation now, and colleagues would have the written version. So, ladies, and I see Mrs. Laurie Chin, so I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and her team, and my good colleague, Immaculate Sister. I have to call out my school. Please introduce your team, and please go ahead. Thank you for coming.
Chairman. So good morning, Senators. Chair, Senator Shireen Golding Campbell, and members of the Select Committee of the Senate and online viewers. We at CCRP were overjoyed when Senator Floyd Morris moved the motion to initiate this legislation, and we thank Senator Shireen Golding Campbell for seconding the motion and immediately agreeing to chair the committee. So, and we thank Mrs. Rosemary Douglas Beckford for facilitating our participation. So with me this morning are CCRP Board Director, Mrs. Patricia Reed-Wall, behind me, Mrs. Angela Patterson, General Manager of CCRP, Mr. Errol Howlett, our accountant, and other team members, Mrs. Sashoy Nichols-Dobson, Mrs. Yvonne Piper, and my husband who has been walking this path with me, Mr. Hubert Chin. We are grateful that we've been invited. And so let us begin. Just a little bit about us, that we're a nonprofit membership organization for persons 40 and over. We're a registered company under the Jamaica Charities Act. We were founded as a legacy project for PROCOM's 30th anniversary. We currently have 12,000 members. Let me see if the screen share is working, because I'm now at page 2. Do you want to try and?
If you take off the participant column, you get a little bigger.
Take out the participants column. Okay, stop sharing and we will share on this side. Stop sharing, Angelo. Go ahead. Here's the slideshow. Right, here we are. And so the main goals of CCRP are to protect, empower, and celebrate Jamaican seniors. And I should mention, we do have outings every month, and seniors do go out to the beach and get some sunshine. And some of them do have dementia and are accompanied by nurses. And we're supported by an experienced board of directors, dedicated team, and 14 parish representatives. As the organization grew, we began to receive appeals and complaints from senior citizens on abuse and general acts of ageism and disrespect. And we have been publicizing this matter. And of course, you are familiar with all the various types of abuse. And to gather data that we have been receiving, we conducted 2 surveys. And next slide. CCRP members were asked if they had seen elderly abuse, and if they had, where did they see it? So from this chart, about 51% said yes, while 49% reported no. In the second chart, instances in the community, family homes, and care homes were most prevalent. They were asked what nature of elderly abuse was witnessed, and of which 29% reported physical abuse, 57%, emotional abuse, 33%, financial abuse, 59% neglect. Interestingly, 60% of members were not able to intervene in these cases of abuse. However, 40% mediated the situation. So the overall findings of our survey suggest that the expectations of CCRP is high. However, of course, we have limited powers, and thus our emphasis has been on advocacy. And of course, we have various comments that came in on this survey about dealing with banks, utility companies, no bathrooms standing in long lines, they get a seat, but they think that because you get a seat, you're waiting all day, service charges, and very little assistance. Sexual abuse by older men of younger women who seduce them, gain access to their money. Mentioned a situation where the bank account was drained and this elderly man was found starving in his apartment. And this one says they'd never seen elderly abuse, but they have been aware of elderly not wanting to complain or wanting to say anything for fear of repercussion or abuse afterwards. So they become fearful and are prepared to settle for anything. And this one speaks directly about the treatment at NIS and that they need to observe the care offered to pensioners. Now, care homes, 73% of respondents had family who use the services of nursing homes. 83% reported a good or fair experience. Of the 17% who reported a poor experience, 32% noted poor nutrition, 29% neglect, and these were the major factors. Where the experience was good or fair, those homes excelled in proper hygiene, 54%, nutrition, 28%, positive communication, 41%, physical aid, 31%, emotional care and compassion, 48%. St. Andrew has 64% of the homes that were mentioned, and Kingston came second, and Manchester, Clarendon, St. Catherine, and Trelawney had very few. And they are asking us to start advocating for the construction of nursing homes around the island, ensure that the position statement that is developed to share with GOJ and the private sector includes minimum standards, such as not more than 2 persons to a room. This person says, I'm broken when I see 3 or 4 in a room. So we have some recommendations re care homes, and I just should say here that some of the areas that our elderly live are so vulnerable, are so volatile, that we have asked members of the Police Community Service Division to assist us in handing out our care packages. So that is actually a photograph of police handing out CCRP care packages. So we're asking for legislation to ensure that care homes are fully licensed by the appropriate ministry and subject to annual inspection. Because the last time we checked, there were only 2 inspectors, which is not adequate. And stiff penalties for operators of care homes which are in breach. We're asking, of course, I mentioned the number of inspectors. We're suggesting that we could place cameras in the public areas of care homes to monitor operations, while, of course, not violating privacy. And the NCSC staff, and I must say they are some of the most compassionate people, and they do try to check on care homes, but they do not have the authorization. So it really is up to the staff at the care home to allow them in. So we're suggesting that they should be trained and authorized to assist in the monitoring, because they have offices in every parish. And just to tell you our personal CCRP's experience with elder abuse, we had to deal with one lady with dementia who was found on the street. And she was just, when we found out where she belonged, she was just couching almost on a veranda. When we found her son, he said he had put her in a care home, but by law, the NCSC nor CCRP was allowed to go and check on this lady. And I think we should have been allowed to be able to check. So when this legislation come into place, we would like to be able to follow through on these cases right to the end to know that people who have come to our attention are indeed safe. We have now 2 cases, one just appeared yesterday, of daughters who live abroad, sending funds for daughters here, and the funds are diverted and the elderly is not being cared for. Actually, this picture we got yesterday, the lady had a wound to her forehead. She was tied up in the wheelchair, and we were told that she was not getting proper hygiene attendance. We also had this elderly woman who was assaulted in Westmoreland, and our parish representative had to visit the home. I must say, Poor Relief came into the picture. She contacted Poor Relief. The house was grilled. The pastor was asked to keep in touch with the lady. So despite the existence of the Maintenance Act, we have found no recorded incident of action being taken. And of course, we think this is due to pride, disability, or fear of reprisal. So we are suggesting a separate court or a dedicated division of the family court to deal with cases of elderly abuse. We also recommend that a commission for the elderly be established. And this could be a transformation of the NCSC, as was done with the transition of the Electoral Advisory Committee to the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. And we think that the commission could have oversight of the implementation of the act, have powers to ensure that there's investigation and punishment, penalties for cases of abuse, and to hold to account organizations who work with the elderly. We believe it should mandate the extradition to Jamaica of relatives or other perpetrators to answer to charges of abuse of the elderly, and that this would help to address the increasing number of social patients occupying hospital beds. And of course, those relatives that Mr. Green spoke about who appear after the death of these persons, they should be charged. Of course, this legislation should protect the whistleblowers, should have power to remove an individual at risk, should have power to ban an abuser for being in contact with the abused individual, should have the power to access financial records where there is suspicion of financial abuse. And we believe that financial institutions should be mandated to insist on co-holders of accounts of persons over 70, or that these persons have arranged power of attorney, because we have cases that have come to our attention where a caregiver took a person with dementia to the bank and cleaned out her account. Had her sign, she looked fine, and the bank figured that it was fine to give the funds to this woman. The Act should make it clear that all persons, whether family, neighbor, community, have a duty to report cases similar to the Child Care and Protection Act. And there should be severe penalties for various types of abuse to deter potential perpetrators. Standards at public and private locations. The government should provide inspectors to enforce standards at these locations. Appropriate ramps, seats, water coolers, and geriatric specialists should be at public clinics and hospitals. Sorry. And we welcome the passage of the Disabilities Act, which addresses some of these concerns. There needs to be more wheelchair-friendly modes of public transportation. We believe that the Act should establish an alert for missing seniors, a quick alert similar to the Ananda alert for children. Life certificate arrangements need to be more user-friendly, and we welcome news of advances in this area. We reached out to the RGD, who indicated willingness to work with NIS on this. We believe that banking fees for seniors over 65 should be abolished. And of course, we believe that ageism should be covered with instructions similar to the Sexual Harassment Act. For example, we hear of elderly persons, not elderly, older persons under 65 still working who are being excluded from some of training for IT, etc., people believing, oh, they're not ready. While we have an 86-year-old member of our board, Mrs. McDonald, who is teaching younger people how to do online banking. That's ageism. We thank the NHF who responded to our request for additional conditions to be covered, and we also acknowledge that the NI Gold benefits were recently increased. However, they remain very limited. Only private sector health plans offered by CCRP cater for seniors up to 79 years. These are underwritten by Sagicor. The Act should mandate that all health insurance companies increase the age limit for eligibility, as people are now working long after the retirement age and are contributing to the country's development. The Act should mandate that pensioners should continue to benefit to some extent from health plans previously enjoyed while being employed. The MOHW has been promoting wellness activities for seniors, and these include nutrition. And so I believe welfare agencies should be checking the nutritional status of seniors when visits are made. We have received complaints that there are limited spaces for seniors to exercise, there are security concerns, and there is a call for well-managed parks similar to Emancipation and Harmony Beach. We therefore recommend that the MLSS and the Ministry of Local Government be mandated to create such facilities in each parish, especially in high-density areas. We had a petition for the reopening of the Rockford Mineral Bath. We had an overwhelming response, and we thank the cement company for their positive action. It's actually being renovated now. And we believe that ODPEM should have a division focused on elderly safety. This should involve training of their parish representatives. We believe there should be collaboration between ODPEM, NCSC, JCF, and the fire brigade to map locations where the elderly are living alone. There should be a system for regular visits to check on wiring, security, and welfare. Too many tragedies dealing with fires. These agencies should be responsible to oversee the safety of the elderly in case of natural disaster, fire, and domestic abuse. As a matter of fact, we've been doing our annual outreach. That's a photograph of us looking at one of the roofs that we repaired after Hurricane Beryl. These are just some examples of our advocacy in the papers. Of course, we've been interviewed. All of this has been happening. So in summary, we are advocating for the country to enact laws which protect seniors from abuse in addition to the systems implemented for their welfare. And we have to thank attorneys at law, Gloria Langren, Peter Mays, Ambassador Alun Dombe Asambo, and then Public Defender Arlene Harrison Henry for their input in our suggestions. The NCSC has been an excellent partner who has responded positively whenever they were called regarding reports on elderly abuse. And this is a photograph that I took at an NCSC event on Elderly Awareness Abuse Day. And you see all the signs that they want a society for all ages. They want respect for the elderly. They declare that neglect is elder abuse. They ask each other to speak out and speak loud, and that when it comes to their money, it is theirs. They must respect their home choice, and they must ensure that the elderly is heard or are heard. And thank you so much for your commitment. We are so happy that this committee is in progress. And these are also some photographs of our outreach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Appreciate that. Senator Gale, you're right off the bat.
Thank you, Chair. And very well thought out presentation and submission.
Thank you, Senator.
You know, I start with this ageism because it does affect people in the workplace. You can't get certain promotion. Some people say, at time you go your yard now.
Yes.
Some employers put you on what you call pre-retirement leave, which I believe should be banned.
Yes.
And, you know, you are referred to. I've been referred to as elder. Somebody see me gray here and woe be unto the person where I beg me something and refer to me as elder. You clearly are not going to get nothing. But that's the kind of society that we live in, where we start to stigmatize status, and they use a term you style certain people. It's going to be difficult to have laws to protect seniors in the public space. But maybe we should consider where it's practicable in institutions and certainly in the workplace where we can make it applicable. So it is something that we can consider. I like the submission, and I believe, Chair, this may have been the first kind of submission that speaks to a court or a commission that explicitly defines a kind of organization that protects the elderly. Yeah? And I look at the listing, and the example that you use about a caregiver going into the bank and to fleece that elderly's account.
It happened.
And I'm wondering, Chair, if
It happens all the time.
it happens, and it happens so much.
Yes.
But, you know, I have some members that I represent in the banking sector. And not that I want to give them more work to do, but I believe the bank should go through a kind, Ivan, I know I see you're looking at me. But I believe the banks should offer a stricter kind of due diligence.
Absolutely.
In this particular
For this
area,
age group, yes.
for this particular age group. I mean, they offer due diligence so much in terms of your application for credit.
For credit, yes.
And there ought to be a higher level of protection in this case that can, kind of mitigate against that type of perpetrated act
Absolutely.
in the protection. So maybe we should consider what kind of legislation and where we put it to protect because it happens too often.
Much too often.
Right?
I think the Bank
So,
of Jamaica could do that.
At some point in time, we may have to consider how we flesh out here this commission that is, guarded against the protection of elderly, which gives it a specific role
Absolutely.
towards the elderly. Chairman, I welcome this presentation. The members now, how do you qualify to become a member?
You just have to be 40 and over.
I
40
qualify.
and over. And
I
we
qualify, Floyd. I'm just a little over 40.
And not only that, we have kept the fees so low. To join is 2,500 Jamaican dollars.
Yes.
And to renew annually, it's 2,000 Jamaican dollars. So we have helpers, we have entrepreneurs, we have people from every level of society because this is where we draw all of this information
You
from.
mentioned where you saw a particular situation and you wanted to go and inspect.
That's right.
Or to follow up.
Yes.
But there would have to be a certain kind of designation afforded to you to be
Yes.
able to do that. Maybe you could explain what kind of designation should be extended to you for consideration in that regard.
Well, the National Council,
Yes.
for example, they had wanted to go because they investigate cases like this. So I believe a social worker who is attached to the council should definitely have permission to go and see where this old lady was put. Right? So it may not be CCRP.
Right. So, but in cohort with CCRP.
Yes, yes. And so when we speak to them, at least they could say,
CCRP.
yes, we have gone, we have checked where she is, and she's comfortable. We couldn't because they said the son had the final right for where she was to go.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Dr. Morris? No, you turned it off.
It's on now. It's on now.
Thank you. Welcome to the team and to Gina for making the presentation here today. And you are a part of a grouping that is giving us very rich information to, make the recommendations for the establishment of the legislation to protect our senior citizens. And, Madam Chair, from my knowledge and interaction with senior citizens, there are two institutions that no matter what advances in technology, there are two institutions that they will always be going to, and that is the post office and the banks.
Yes, yes, indeed.
But I find, Madam Chair, that at these institutions, there are certain basic facilities that are lacking for senior citizens. So you would find them sitting in the banks and they would want to use the bathroom, but there are no provisions there in the bank.
That's right.
They would have to call upon the manager or somebody to assist them or so, And I've been wondering, how do we treat with such a situation in the law? Because, these institutions offer a service to the public, and in particular when it comes on to our senior citizens and the population of persons with disabilities, there must be some minimum facilities that are there for these individuals to utilize if emergencies should occur. So, I mean, any recommendation from Eugene and your team?
Well, I believe that we should ask the Bank of Jamaica for our financial institutions to designate this, to ensure that they have facilities for seniors. And I mean, the seniors represent a very large percentage of their clients, so they should respect them. And I just think that this should be a legal matter, just as the Disabilities Act is asking for access, etc. These things, if they are not made into law, you know, people are not going to show the concern that they need to show. It should not be just left up to them.
Yes, yes. Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Morris. Mrs. Orchin, I have a couple of questions, and I want to go back to the aspect of your presentation where you titled it Recommendations for Legislation.
Yes.
And Senator Gale mentioned it, that you have recommended a commission for the elderly.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the role and function of that commission? And can I ask you to share your thoughts with us about the structure of a commission for the elderly in law as opposed to, in comparison with, let me use that language, in comparison with an elder advocate, similar to the children's advocate? And I'd love to hear your views on that.
I believe that a commission would have a duty, you know, would have a duty to ensure that these laws are adhered to. And therefore, I would think the selection of members of this commission should be very carefully done. I don't see one advocate doing this. I think because of the varied concerns to do with the elderly that we have discussed here, I think we need to have experts like Mrs. Latimer on this commission so they can deal with all the various aspects and to keep monitoring the adherence to the legislation. And this is why I think it should be a commission.
So wouldn't that then, is it that you are suggesting that the National Senior Citizens Council be the body that is, if want of a better word, morphed into this commission? Because what it sounds like you're saying to me is a commission established under law that is not just an advocacy body, not just a legal standing in place or in representation of older persons, but also a body that is implementing and monitoring the implementation of policy and law.
Yes,
currently, our children's advocate, while she's governed by particular laws and she looks to particular laws in relation to her representation of children, I don't know that she is necessarily an implementer or monitors the implementation in as far as how it's working. You know, she may do some monitoring in terms of any adverse effects on children. So I want to be clear about the kind of structure you're proposing.
Well, you know, Chairman, our National Council for Senior Citizens, they have been very active. And they are the ones who have developed a sound policy that you can draw on. So I'm thinking, why would we ascribe this to just one individual when there is a council of experienced persons? And of course, you can always involve other persons, co-opt them on this council, who have been really functioning well and have been serving well. So I think you know, you don't reinvent what you don't need to reinvent. You can transform them into the commission. Very, very knowledgeable people and very dedicated.
So the other question that I wanted to ask, thank you for that. The other question that I wanted to ask is in relation to your recommendation that the legislation should mandate the extradition of relatives and other perpetrators to answer to charges of abuse and extradition to Jamaica. So you're talking about relatives who are abroad, and this particular type of abuse you're referring to here is neglect abuse. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that? I mean, have you seen, where else do we have neglect abuse as established as an offense? Are you familiar with any other jurisdiction that has that?
Oh, no, there are very, as Gloria Langwin had told us, that there are some really good laws for the protection and care of the elderly in other Commonwealth countries. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, neglect is a form of abuse. Mm-hmm. So I believe this extradition, there should be an investigation to find out who the relatives are, to find out where they are, in the same way that other investigations are conducted. Because Mr. Green said a relative arrived after the parent had died and wanted to get the death certificate so they could claim on the insurance. So I think if there were investigations to find this person and to bring them here and to help and let them face the law, then I think it should happen. Mm-hmm. It should happen because, of course, it is really a burden on the health system right now.
You know, I appreciate the urgency and the passion of members of the public who advocate for initiatives like this. And I've spoken to a few who have shared similar thoughts. As a legislator, I grapple with the concept of criminalizing or sanctioning neglect abuse. And I grapple with it because we currently have the Maintenance Act providing for children to maintain their elderly parents who are unable to maintain themselves, but it is largely unenforceable. And we have conditions in this country where we have parents, elderly parents, who when they were young were not responsible fathers and mothers and did not maintain or raise their children. Mm-hmm. And so to now apply or to assign a responsibility to those children to care for these persons is almost like another form of pain for the child who has had to live with that pain all their life. And I grapple with that. I can't yet conceive in my own mind what kind of provision that would look like in law, or whether it should be a provision in law at all. And so when you talk about extraditing to Jamaica, I mean, I can think of so many issues and so many hurdles to that. Yes. The least of which is the relationship issue and the responsibility issue. But just the bigger issues of cross-border jurisdiction and responsibility and cost and international law and where the jurisdiction that these people live in may be and whether that's a jurisdiction would even entertain extraditing somebody who may be a citizen of that jurisdiction and not just a citizen of Jamaica. But I appreciate the problem that you're raising, and I think we're going to have to really hunker down to figure out whether this is something that can be addressed in law. I have a final question. I'm going to release it to my members after that. The question of it's two final, actually. The question of the whistleblowers. can you speak a little bit more about what you mean by a whistleblower in this context? And I'll ask my final question as well. If you can add a little bit more to the proposal to mandate the financial institutions to insist on co-holders of accounts. And if you'll do the last one before the first one, I will just say this. You mentioned here that person should have a power of attorney. This is something that I have encountered in practice as an attorney, and the banks are now enforcing it. So a lot of people think that if you have a power of attorney in place, particularly with an older person who has declining cognitive ability, that you're okay. It is not okay. A power of attorney becomes absolutely useless and invalid the moment that person is not mentally competent or has such reduced capacity that they're not able to really make decisions on their own. And banks are beginning in recent years to enforce that, so that even though they see you coming all the time with the POA on behalf of Miss Jones or your mommy Jones, they are not allowing you to transact business on her behalf. You are being forced to go to court to file an application for guardianship in order to take financial control. So that's one of the things that perhaps you want to sort of educate your members on, because oftentimes older persons think they're safe because of the power of attorney. Once you're ill, mentally ill, or unable to communicate and unable to make decisions, that power of attorney is of no use to you anymore.
Okay, noted.
Yes,
and
go ahead.
Therefore, getting a co-holder on the account is a more effective way to ensure that they have the access to the funds to take care of you.
Thank you.
Yes.
And the whistleblower matter.
Yes, the whistleblower matter, indeed. Yesterday, the friend of this lady abroad, whose sister is abusing the mother, she is the one who sent me the information and sent me details of all that was going on. Now, I don't want that sister to know anything about this lady, but suppose it comes out that it is this lady who actually went and took some pictures when the sister was out and sent them to me that I have shared with the NCSC. We need to protect her. But
what are we protecting her from? What's the danger to a family member who reports another family member?
She's not a family member, she's just a friend.
She's just a friend?
Yes.
Are you talking about physical danger, harm?
Physical harm, I mean heartbreaking.
Okay, because I would think that we already have provisions in law in terms of assault, you know.
Yes, NCSC will send their social worker, and I think the police will get involved. Because we had a case like that and the police did get involved.
Yeah, I think we have existing laws that would cover that scenario. The concern, and I asked the question for some clarity, because the whistleblower regime really is about retaliation for reporting some wrong, but you have to have the power to retaliate, and the person who might receive that retaliation has to be in the line of fire. So physical, definitely, I think is already covered under our criminal code, but it's something that we'll continue to look at and just to make sure that we're covering the concern that you're raising. I have a number of senators lining up. I don't normally jump in so long. So can I go first with, was it Senator Longmore? Senator Gale, if you permit me to take our lady senator first. I'm so sorry, Senator Longmore, I apologize. My clerk is letting me know that Senator Fraser-Binns was first in line and has been waiting for quite a while. Senator Fraser-Binns. Thank you, Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Chairman. I do not have a problem with Senator Longmore going ahead. I can yield to her.
She's saying go ahead. She's saying go ahead. I love how my lady senators operate in this committee. Go ahead, Senator Fraser-Binns.
Very well. Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Mrs. Lorichin for her very detailed presentation, and I do feel the passion and completely support some of the points raised. One of the things that grabbed my attention, and I hear this throughout our presentation, Chair, is the fact that the elderly feel vulnerable. I've seen the word in some of the slides, but
Yes.
to me, the underlying thing coming from her presentation is just the vulnerability that the elderly feel. So they do not want to complain when there's a case of abuse. So they just settle for what they get. They're afraid of repercussions or for further abuse. And as we contemplate what an elderly care act should look like, we also have to step outside of the legislation, look at the social side, because I believe coming from all of this discussion, Chair, would have to be how do we create a culture where our elderly do not feel vulnerable, where they feel confident that they can report, that they can share. And, you know, even we've heard it already in the presentation from other persons, but again, coming home today is the fact that there has not been, or we're not aware of any cases under the Maintenance Act for fair.
For fair.
And it goes back to what I'm talking about, the vulnerability. And, you know, Chair, this is something that I think we have to spend some time to look at. That's one. Secondly, and that's more a comment than the second thing, Chair, has to do, and it finds a lot of favor with me, is a proposal that we need to create within the legislative structure almost the type of reporting that is in the Child Care and Protection Act, where someone that has knowledge, and you have the different categories, as you're aware, Chair, that if you have knowledge that a child is being abused, what you are required to do. And I think that that would be an easy transfer to an Elderly Care Act. If you have knowledge that an elderly person is being abused or is likely to be abused, then there are certain responsibilities that you must take. And what it does here is that, one, it allows anyone who has knowledge to share that information. So it's not only the victim, the elderly, that has to report, but anyone that has information, again, reducing the vulnerability that that person feels, which must be supported by creating the environment where the person feels comfortable sharing the experience that they have had. And the second thing that I want to mention, and perhaps we can have a further discussion on it, is the co-owner account. Because one of the things that, and it's not an easy fix, but I do find some favor with it. But the drawback, you see, is there was a time, as I understand, when you could go to the bank and you could say, I'm going to be adding Sophia's name to this account for convenience. And you would trust that Sophia would use it for convenience, meaning to pay the bills related to the elderly. Over time, that kind of trust we've lost that trust in one another. And one of the things that we have to do is to see how, working with our financial institutions, we can make it easier for the elderly, one, to pay bills and to access accounts, but secondly, to ensure that their investment is not utilized by persons of questionable character. And the other thing as well is there has to be, again, in the discussion with our financial institution chair, because as you know, once your name is added to an account, the issue of survivorship comes into place. So how then do we treat it? Because if your name is added to an account for convenience, and at the same time, the law says if your name is on an account, then you are the owner when one person dies, then how do you ensure that the person whose name is added solely for convenience does not become the beneficiary? So these are some of the things that we'll have to discuss, but I can see the benefit to be derived from the co-ownership of accounts for the purpose of convenience. Those are my comments, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. You know, I think of the structure of the Companies Act when you mentioned that last point, and a beneficial shareholder. I wonder if there's such a thing as conceiving of a beneficial account holder who can act in a convenient time, but who on the death of the older person is holding those funds in trust for the estate or the beneficiaries of that person's will. Senator Longmore.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Lorichin. I don't know if you wanted to respond to anything Senator Fraser-Binns had said?
No, but I thank her for her,
okay.
for her observation.
Right, thank you. I want to congratulate you and your organization for your work done, and especially for pursuing research, objective research. And may I suggest that you formalize this research, because this is there's a dearth of information around objective findings around the care of the elderly in Jamaica. And so I think there might be a retrospective study that could be had here. So I would definitely encourage you to do that.
Thank you.
And very interesting findings. I won't go into that. But just also, again, to reiterate, and as we contemplate this legislative process, once a man, twice a child. And more, the findings that you're reflecting here is emphasizing the vulnerability that is similar to children. And so I think that the speak of the commission, I had mentioned that before too. I appreciate you endorsing that. And I think that we don't need to, as legislators, we contemplate drafting this. I think there's very similar layout already that we can adapt to reflect the care of the elderly. So I congratulate you, and I just really wanted to especially recognize the formal research that you have done to validate your findings. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Longmore. Senator Gale.
Chairman, you know, as we progress in these sittings and submissions, I am reflecting on, and I would have said it before, who is going to be the ministry that is going to be accountable for this kind of legislation? Who is going to own it? And we assumed that it would have been the Ministry of Labor.
Yes. And social
But in
security.
saying that, you know, I want to advance that if that is going to be so, then I believe a representative from the Ministry of Labor should be present continuously throughout these sittings to be able to understand the layout and the kind of concept that is being put forward. Because a lot of burden is going to be placed on us little senators when we're going to be going through the matrix. And Gina, come back to the commission. And this commission is going to be a big ticket item, because what has been advanced is now looking at not only the protection of the elderly, but the preventative measures that have to be taken. You suggested the role and function of the council. Now, the council already has its challenges, and this council has to be made now in a more expansive role in nature. And the council has its services and its support and its outreach. But we're now going to have to look at a kind of separation of power and authority and a firewall between those who set the standards, those who provide the service of outreach, and those who have to investigate and inspect. A separation of authority.
I appreciate that.
And we might have to consider where, if it's the council, how expanded that council is going to be, whether the council is going to be purported as a regulated authority, a statutory body in nature that gives it that level of power, or whether it's a unique, separate, and set-aside commission that is so designated. So that's what we're going to have to grapple in terms of reaching, because now that we hear it, you know, we can't assume or abandon these submissions.
Absolutely not.
And so we have to now carefully think out how we are going to progress, what submission we are going to make. I certainly from the start never I never know that these things would come at us, but it tells us the importance of the select consultation that takes place in this parliament, you know? So, Chair, we have the work ahead of us in terms of this committee.
We do, and it's almost a little overwhelming. Senator Morris, I'm going to ask you to be as brief as you can because I'm looking at 11:30. We have a hard stop at 12. I'm not sure how long the Psychiatric Association's presentation is, but I don't want to short them time. So go ahead, Senator Morris.
Thank you.
Pull your mic towards you, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Supporting a point that was raised by Senator Cavengale in terms of getting a representative from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to be here consistently at these meetings, because generally in terms of the legislative process, legislations and requests for legislation to be drafted comes from a parent ministry and it goes to cabinet. And this is as a result of a special motion that was tabled in the parliament and debated, and this committee has been established to look at the scope of that legislation. So you want to make sure that you have the members or a member of the ministry being here so that you don't, after we finish our work, we don't have the process being delayed because the ministry is doing its own thing, and so they have to, our work is put on hold. All right? I think that, you know, once we complete our work and the matter is sent to cabinet, and I guess it would ask for drafting instructions to be given, you know, then the Ministry of Labor and Social Security would take it from there in consultation with the CPC.
Thank you for that, Senator Morris. I would be wholly shocked, though, if the Ministry of Labor and Social Security were not monitoring these sittings. I wouldn't like to know if that were the case. I'm sure they are, but we will issue an official invitation for them to attend the sittings. Thank you. Mrs. Laurichin, thank you so very much, and thank you to your team for coming, for sharing with us. You too, I'm going to put on notice that we're going to come back as we're interrogating these proposals, perhaps to ask for some clarification in some places, perhaps to ask you what you think of some ideas that we're crafting. But it's going to be a dynamic process to the very end. Thank you so much.
We're grateful for the opportunity. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Senators here and online. Thank you so much.
The Psychiatric Association is next. We have 27 minutes. Can I ask, yes, would you introduce yourself? I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you outside before the committee meeting started.
Yes, good morning. Dr. Brian Kazara here, psychiatrist. I work at Bellevue Hospital. Thank you for having me. Can I begin?
Please do. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kazara. And are you alone or are you with a group?
Today I am by myself.
Okay, okay. Senator Longmore?
I must take the opportunity to welcome Dr. Kazara, my colleague. And he's also, I forget to mention that he's also the president of the Jamaica Psychiatric Association.
Okay.
So very happy to have you here, Dr. Kazara.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Senator Dr. Longmore. Okay, I'm being told I should probably move to the center stage, so 1 second. Okay. So firstly, it's an honor to be here, and I'm thankful to the committee for this invitation. In particular, I'm grateful to Ms. Rosemary Douglas Beckford for her prompt and consistent communication throughout this process. I actually have been able to follow the previous meetings, and I've learned quite a lot from watching them. I first want to say thank you to Dr. Longmore, of course, who is someone I not only consider a colleague, but a teacher. As a former president of the JPA herself and an active member of the JPA, she has consistently encouraged the community, and by that I mean the mental health community, the psychiatry community, to play its role in national development. Of course, I want to acknowledge Ms. Sandra Latabadere, who continues to do important work in this vulnerable population, especially in the area of research and advocacy. And special thanks to the CCRP, whose easily available material was actually very useful in the preparation of this presentation. Given how comprehensive and thorough the presentations have been today, there is some overlap, and what I'm hopeful to add is a clinical outlook on it all. Now, one last thing I want to mention is that due to communication issues, the JPA did not initially submit a presentation, and so I actually did that as an individual myself. Thankfully, the committee gracefully allowed us to be involved towards the tail end. Due to this, we have begun discussions among the JPA members, and these discussions did play a role in this presentation, but I would have to admit that the entirety of their input may not be fully represented here, and I would like this brief presentation to be a first step in the ongoing discourse around this important topic, with the potential for further input from the broader mental health community, inclusive but not limited to psychiatrists. And I think the presence of different healthcare providers today and advocacy groups speaks to the kind of multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral approach that's going to be necessary.
Dr. Kazar, I'm just going to interrupt you for a short moment,
yes,
just to make this point, and I'm speaking as chair, and I believe I have the support of my colleagues in this. We had initially asked for submissions from December,
yes,
to be made to this committee by February 15th. Of course, that deadline has long passed. If there are groups out there, and if there are persons out there who still wish to make a submission, certainly we are still in the phase of hearing submissions, and we have other dates scheduled for other persons who have already submitted to be heard orally. Please send them into the Parliament. It will be my duty as chair to put them to the committee, to ask the committee if they wish to hear oral presentations on them. But there is nothing barring you, even if a date has been passed or has expired, then nothing bars a person in the country from sending a submission to an existing committee that is operating in the Parliament. It is a bit of a misunderstanding about how that works. Certainly committees set deadlines, but at the end of the day, the duty of the clerk is to pass a communication to the chair, and the chair has no authority to not put that communication to the committee. I want to be clear about that.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And especially as a mental health community, I think we're moving now to be more integrated. So of course, including social workers, psychologists, etc. I think those groups would also love to be involved. So thank you very much for making that clear. Just to go into the JPA very quickly, it's a professional association for psychiatrists or specialist mental health doctors under the umbrella of the Medical Association of Jamaica. And the mission of the Jamaica Psychiatric Association is to engage in mental health promotion, prevention, advocacy, and access to quality and equitable mental health and wellness practices in Jamaica, including psychiatric education and training and professional development. Our main areas of interest are patient care and advocating for culturally sensitive, person-centered, compassionate, and evidence-based care. We also focus on ethics, looking at the adherence to ethical standards and professionalism. Respect, that's a big theme today. We believe in respect for clients, their families, patient autonomy, colleagues, and also diverse views. And we strongly believe in the collaboration with colleagues and other stakeholders. And of course, we strongly believe in advocacy. Now, as has been mentioned before, across the world, there's been a consistent trend of national populations having higher proportions of persons above the age of 65, with this trend set to continue in the future. There is significant development and need for the public to appreciate the unique health challenges of the elderly. Among the conditions that disproportionately affect the elderly are non-communicable diseases, such as our mental health issues, with a lot of attention being paid towards depression and dementia. Depression in the elderly is a significant public health issue associated with reduced quality of life and increased mortality. Jamaica has experienced an aging population, and there's lots of research to back that. And unsurprisingly, this period of increased aging has been associated with higher rates of non-communicable diseases, like the mental health issues that have been brought out today. As has been shown in other populations, depression is notably prevalent among the elderly in Jamaica as well. And this is an issue that is particularly exacerbated in rural areas where there is markedly reduced access to health care for the elderly. This reality appears to be due to a number of social determinants of health, such as high rates of poverty among the elderly in Jamaica, among other things. And one thing that should be noted is that, unfortunately, we have less than progressive sociocultural beliefs about the elderly. Ideas that the elderly will naturally experience depression, for instance. That's a widely held belief, unfortunately. And as well, there is, and I know Ms. Latibaudiere knows this well, there's an unfortunate belief that dementia is a natural progression, but we in fact acknowledge that it's a disease process and it's not inevitable with aging. For this reason, I feel it's important to focus on mental health issues of this target group, as it is an important, albeit underserved area of public health. And below are some key areas which include personal security, human rights, and mental health intersect, and where I think legislation can have a significant impact on the lives of older adults in Jamaica. So firstly, one topic that has been discussed at length already, elderly abuse. As a vulnerable group, older adults are at increased risk of abuse, resulting in significant psychological distress and physical harm. Legislation should be crafted to have specific penalties for the infringements to empower older adults. And additionally, compulsory reporting of suspected elderly abuse should be included to ensure caregivers, healthcare workers, and proximate citizens are aware of their responsibility to bring these infringements to the attention of authorities. Abuse is in fact very widespread, and I think most healthcare providers in Jamaica, regardless of their specialty, have probably heard stories or even seen firsthand where this happens. Oftentimes when persons present to healthcare providers, you can see a lot of irritability and aggression from the caregivers that come with them or from the persons that accompany them. And at times, you can tell, we spoke about also the specter of fear that a lot of elderly persons experience in Jamaica. At times you can tell that persons feel less comfortable being able to talk about their health concerns in the presence of caregivers. And so I do think the importance of elderly abuse and having mechanisms to address that is of paramount importance. Another topic that we discussed today, and is very relevant for healthcare providers as well, is caregiver support. Though under the Maintenance Act, adult offsprings have legal obligations to provide for their elderly parents or grandparents, provisions need to be paid for those who are unable to assist them sufficiently due to their own economic limitations. And we see that quite frequently in clinical settings, where there are persons who are well-intentioned, but in fact, due to very limited economic means, aren't always able to provide the type of care that we would want. Financial assistance in the form of tax incentives could be applied to adults who demonstrate a history of genuine desire to take care of their older relatives, but have demonstrable financial constraints. Provisions could also be made for financial incentives, such as small stipends for citizens who offer to assist older adults who do not have family members readily available to help them. I can say in the hospitals we see many cases of adult children leaving their relatives or telling healthcare providers that they will not come back for relatives. Again, I know Ms. Latibaudiere, of course, would have had that experience. Many social workers sadly have to have those discussions. And the reality is that there is an understanding amongst most healthcare providers that the Maintenance Act really shouldn't allow for this, but we are seeing where it's not always so clear how consistently enforced this is. And so that is a problem. And I think as the CCRP would have mentioned, I myself can say I haven't really come across many cases, or any, in fact, where persons have been held accountable. I can certainly say in my workplace, we get elderly persons who are dropped off, and when we try and interface with the relatives, we get a lot of tension, a lot of pushback, and we don't necessarily always feel emboldened by law enforcement to be able to try and get them safely back home. Advanced healthcare directives is also quite important. Presently, there's no specific legislation that dictates how individuals can legally direct their end-of-life wishes. What exists presently is an informal system that is not legally binding and one that relies on the interpretation of family members or healthcare providers to follow through with it. This creates a very difficult situation for healthcare providers, certainly I've seen that, family members, and it doesn't optimally protect the dignity of older adults. Also, on the topic of cognitive testing, I think it's very important that we try to expand accessibility and availability of cognitive testing. Presently, we have very few publicly available services specifically for older adults with cognitive decline. Utilization of health centers and hospitals would be recommended. We do have a very robust community mental health service, and as Dr. Longmore would have highlighted, it exists to take care of persons across the lifespan. So it takes care of children and it takes care of elderly adults. However, one important distinction that exists is within our community mental health services is that we do have a kind of specialized team for children and adolescents because we acknowledge the unique challenges that they have and the type of approach that's required. I would say that the same thing should be extended to the geriatric community as well. An acknowledgement that cognitive impairment in isolation does not mean one does not have decision-making capacity, I think is very important and I think should be stated, because I have seen as well in the clinical setting where caregivers and others believe because there might be some very limited cognitive impairment that the person no longer has decision-making capacity, and I've even seen cases where they feel emboldened to impose that on healthcare providers. So I think making that very clear in legislation would be a useful tool for persons to be able to point to. And of course, to ensure that cognitive testing is done by persons with formal training. Finally, looking at nursing care standards, and of course, the CCRP, and Ms. Latibaudiere spoke about this very well. I just want to pay special attention to the cadre of staff. The Mental Health Act actually outlines a minimally acceptable standard of staffing for persons who go out in the community to take care of mental health crises. I think the same should apply for nursing homes. So we all acknowledge the importance of the multidisciplinary team, but I think a minimally accepted standard of trained professionals should be legislated, along with, of course, the great recommendation for regular evaluations to be mandatory. This is by no means exhaustive, but I believe that these are some key changes that could lead to notable improvement in the lives of the elderly in Jamaica and their families. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kazira. Another meaty presentation. And I have so many questions. I'm just checking online before I fire the first one. Can you tell us a little bit more about cognitive testing and the kind of cognitive testing that you are advocating? And I'm asking this question in the context of the reality of older persons having to send in life certificates. My in-laws are in their 90s, my parents are over 75. And so now they're doing life certificates. That's not always the most convenient thing, but it's a way for the ministry that deals with welfare benefits and pensions to know who is collecting it at the other end of the spectrum. But if you have, so it's a measuring, it's a check and balance thing. The cognitive testing, is there cognitive testing that is short, easy to do, not hours long, a sort of standard testing that could be applied to, say, banks, attorneys? We do a thing in my office where we ask people to get a letter from their doctor if they're beyond a certain age, to make sure that they have the ability to instruct us, because I can't tell sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then Senator Gill?
Sure, no problem. So there are a number of cognitive tests that exist when trying to discern the level of cognitive impairment someone has. What we largely use in our setting is the mini mental status examination, the MMSE. But I can say that there has been work done by one of our distinguished researchers in this area, Dr. Ishtar Govaya, that has looked at trying to implement additional tools that speak to exactly what you're saying, tools that are efficient, that would be widely accessible, and cost-effective, and also some of the tools she's looking at appear to even have a higher level of accuracy than the mini mental status exam. I think, as it stands now, and I could be wrong, I'm open to correction, we don't have a distinct definition for the what we would consider an appropriate cognitive test, and I think that's very important. I think to how we handle it in court, where there's a forensic mental health issue, there's a referral to at least a psychiatrist, and I think that's a move in the right direction, because I know it wasn't always that way. I would say that depending on the, for lack of a better word, seriousness of the indication for the cognitive testing, it would be good to then have an accompanying criteria for what would be appropriate. So for instance, what I would say is, screening somebody who might be wandering from home, right, may require a less intensive level of evaluation than a situation where we're trying to, as we've mentioned, we're looking at financial processes and things like that. So I think being able to establish, okay, this would be the level of cognitive testing or assessment required for this specific type of scenario would be very useful.
That's work for the medical profession, though, the Psychiatric Association and the MAG, more so than the Parliament. We'd be guided by that in terms of how you can legislate the use of it in various processes. But right now, I was talking to Ms. Latibodere about this earlier this morning. It's difficult sometimes to even get the older person to the doctor to be able to get the assessment done. I've tried to do it in the past, and all the doctors except for one said they wouldn't do a home visit. And I was at a loss. And I couldn't use the one who said they would, because the older person would never have stood up with that one. Okay, thank you. Senator Gill and then Senator Longmore.
The more the world evolves, the more there's a demand for certain kinds of change. There's a common thread that is flowing through some of these submissions, and that's the caregiver support. Now, here is a situation where we would have been saying, financial support for caregivers, and then you have this qualification in terms of technical training for caregivers, which I believe is essential. In this very space, we would have had the proposal for the teaching bill that calls for a kind of qualification and licensing, which sets standards. So the populace is demanding a kind of standard that we have to respond to. And even there are concerns about standards if we are going to effectively support or deliver. We have to support and deliver with certain standards. So we have to determine that level of qualification or training that is going to be required for the formal caregivers, whether institutions or otherwise. And if we're going to infuse that in a legislation, but also the informal Slatibodere that you spoke about, they too have to go through some level of awareness. It might not be the level of the threshold of qualifications, but certainly awareness if we are going to properly support. So the common thread that we have to take away is what is it going to be for caregivers? because they play a very essential role in the protection of the elderly going forward.
No.
Thank you, Chair, and very proud of you, Brian. Well done, well done. No, yeah, you know, I have to give the kudos. Yes. I want to really appreciate one or two things that you brought to the floor. One, the repeated emphasis on the prevalence of depression in the elderly as opposed to dementia. I've said it a couple of times, you know, pseudo-dementia, but it's good to hear it coming from your source of depression in the elderly, a very significant impacting agent that when we speak of the resources that needs to be had, we oftentimes see the memory impairment and the lack of capacity, not recognizing this is depression. So I'm very happy that you brought that to the fore. Also, and you mentioned it, but you skirted over it, but I zoned in on it, the rural inequity in the delivery of services for the elderly. And this is something I noted that Mrs. Lorichin's organization has set up in all 14 parishes, and I forgot to congratulate you on that, because that is significantly one of the issues that we have. Because we have to recognize that, especially in those rural communities, is where we have the farmers, the persons who tend to tie in now with what you also mentioned, Dr. Cazzaro, the significant socio-cultural beliefs that operate still. You have persons who are still of the generation who believe that estate planning will accelerate their death. So you have persons who will not want to make a will because it is ingrained in them that making a will is a signal that they are ready for transitioning. And so these are some of the factors that uniquely your presentation, I think, brought to the floor that we need to also incorporate in our deliberations. And of course, just to add, Chair, when you mentioned of the situation that occurred in your office, might I add, a well-equipped community mental health service could have provided such an input for you. So again, emphasizing that we sometimes don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are structures that are in place that we just need to bolster and enhance. Congrats again, Brian.
As a private person, how would I access that? I mean,
the family member could contact the community team that would be attached to the hospital nearest to them. Okay. Or the health center that is nearest to them.
I mean, as an attorney, I have literally sat down and taken instructions from somebody for 45 minutes before I realized that they were cognitive.
Yes.
No, because they sounded clear. They spoke in a detailed way. They used names. And until they said the name of somebody who I knew was dead, and that's when
that is what he also brought to the floor in terms of the difference between cognitive impairment and capacity. Capacity for decision making in various aspects. It's not just generally capacity, you know, but it is capacity for care, capacity for financial decision making, for even medical procedures, etc. So it is what we're hearing, and I celebrate, and I didn't want to attach myself to it fulsomely, where Senator Gale, you see me, a doctor now, Senator Gale advocated for the presence of the Ministry of Labor and Security to be here. But with the significance of what we're hearing, I wouldn't mind health chiming in significantly, because I think and especially those aspects that deal with the care of the elderly, it would not be a bad idea to have them specially invited to perhaps one or two of our meetings.
We can do that.
Thank you.
You know, my position as a legislator is that the technical teams, meaning the permanent staff in the ministry, should make themselves available because this is part of their work. I don't think you need a special invitation from the Parliament to take an interest in matters going on in the Parliament that touch and concern the work you're doing. We will write, but my expectation is that that's part of doing your job well. Senator Longmore and Dr. Cazzaro, Am I pronouncing it right? Kazara. Thank you very much. When you talk about cognitive testing, the different levels of cognitive impairment, when a doctor writes a report or issues a report on a patient for use by a third party, is there a structure of that report that indicates that, yes, this may be a minimal level of cognitive impairment, but this person should be able to take financial decisions or should be able to self-care or fix their own meals? How does a third party utilize that report? How do we read that report?
Sure. So I must admit that Senator Dr. Longmore stole my thunder because I was going to say, just like she did, that in, the community mental health service already does regular home visits. So for like the situation that you would have mentioned already, just a slight repurposing of it could deal with that gap that you've identified, because I'm sure many persons in Jamaica could benefit from that. But regarding the specific question you asked, again, I look to how it's handled with courts presently. We actually have formal, structured evaluation forms for fitness to plead, for instance, and things like that. So you are given spaces to write in, and you know the exact information you should be able to present in a succinct way. That presently doesn't exist for cognitive testing. So if a report is going to be done on a cognitive test, the structure, the form, the information provided is left to the discretion of the healthcare provider. So I think that that's another area that we could look to work on, because I think the government has done a really good job in certain areas. For instance, when I was working at the Child Guidance Clinic, there is a form that the CPFSA brings, or children from public homes bring, that you have to fill out, that outlines the relevant information, and you have to do it every single time they come. In some forensic clinics, the fitness to plead form has to be filled out every time when dealing with public courts. I think a similar system like that would be good and lead to that kind of standardized way of reporting that would be ideal.
Thank you very much. And again, that's not necessarily something that has to be done in legislation. That perhaps is something that is a practice direction by the Chief Justice, and perhaps he needs to hear from us about some of these discussions in terms of treating with older persons and those kinds of evaluations that are required by the court. So we do have some letters to write where matters that come up for discussion are not matters for legislative action, but are relevant, and there is a gap, and I certainly will see to it as chair that the necessary letters go out from the Parliament to the various bodies, whether they're ministries, departments, agency, courts, whatever. Thank you so very much. This has been a most enriching morning. There's a lot of stuff, and I know that all of you had submissions that you didn't cover everything. So we're going to have to dive in even more. And so members, we can have some follow-up discussions on the matters that were presented to us here. Thank you all for coming. Given the hour, members, and my earlier indication in relation to the minutes, we will be in touch to figure out what that date is. We are scheduled to return here on the 27th of May to continue hearing submissions. But I want to thank all those who presented today, Ms. Latiboder, Mrs. Laurie Chin and the CCRP team, and Dr. Kazara. Thank you very much from the Jamaica Psychiatric Association. Thank you so very much, and I'm putting you too on notice that we may have some follow-up questions and discussions to have with you as we continue with our work. Thank you all so much to my parliamentary team. Thank you to my IT support. We didn't have any hitches today. I'm so pleased to see that. And my ever faithful, ever sure committee clerk, Mrs. Beckford. Thank you so very much. Members, with that, might I have a motion for the adjournment of this meeting? Thank you, Senator Longmore, seconded by Senator Caban-Gale. This meeting is adjourned.
So who keeps our taxpayer money in check? Well, the PAC and PAAC help watch over the country's budget. And one